Hello, I'm Paul Perrello, and welcome to another edition of the Philly Factor. Well, make no mistake about it, Philadelphia is a city of diverse neighborhoods from South Philadelphia to the far northeast. Philadelphia is also a city of diverse personalities, many of whom have contributed to the city, region, country, and even the world. Many of those personalities have been documented in a new book by author Thom. The name of the book is Legendary Locals of Center City, Philadelphia. And it introduces us to the early pioneers of politics, the arts and science, activists and entertainers, as well as today's athletes, business people, and spiritual warriors. Thom is a journalist and author of at least 9, maybe even 10 books. He joins us today to talk about his new book, Legendary Locals of Center City, Philadelphia. Thom, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Paul, it's great to be here.
So,
Thanks.
9, is this your 10th book then?
I think this is my 10th or 11th. I've actually lost count. Not that 10 is all that big.
Correct, but it's, hey, it's quite an accomplishment.
Well, thank you very much. I liked doing this book, and I think that what really came to my aid was the fact that I've been a journalist for so long, and I've interviewed a lot of people in this book. And so I was able to tap into my archives and, get half of the bios right.
Right.
But just writing bios about people, it's a lot more challenging than you might think, because you don't want a biographical segment to be like a Wikipedia entry.
Right.
And they can be very dry and uninspiring.
So let me ask you then, when you say you had all this information, because I'm intrigued by this, because I too, 35 years in radio, I've acquired all of this information about all of these people, and I'm constantly asked, what are you going to do with all of this information? Now, I started out in a time where everything was typed out on a typewriter, so I have boxes and boxes of information on people. Today with computers, you can easily store it and you don't have to worry about it. So when you decided to take on this project, did you have to sift through many of these papers that maybe, or many of these articles in the true sense of paper form to get the information?
Well, when I was a teenager, I also used an old Underwood typewriter. So that's how I started. And when I edited my journalism school paper, we used to use the mimeograph sheets,
Right.
and I would spend weekends typing these things out with ink-stained hands, and it would get on your clothes. But I have a basement filled with the newspaper articles that I've done for a lot of papers in the city. And a lot of these are interviews and feature articles on a lot of some of the personalities in the book. But you know what? It's gotten too crowded for me. I didn't even know half of them were. I'm grateful that I had the good sense to put the latest ones upstairs in my study, so
Right.
I was able to tap into those.
Yeah, that's a good move. Some of the, I was reading and going through the book, and some of the people that you've included in this book, Legendary Locals of Center City, Philadelphia, are names that everybody seems to know. I mean, we could talk about Mario Lanza. I mean, I shouldn't say everybody, because chances are there's a generation out there now, if it's not, Justin Timberlake or, Nicki Minaj, they have no idea who Mario Lanza is or was. But, for a generation, though, he was the voice. I mean, even before Frank Sinatra arrived on the scene, there was Mario Lanza. So some of these names and some of the people you've included in the book are no-brainers, but then you've also included in your book those unsung heroes. I mean, people that were famous but don't necessarily get the credit for their accomplishments.
And that's a real Quaker City problem. I think that comes from the city's legacy. The plain Quaker, don't be too ostentatious, don't boast about your own career. Everything is kind of settled at mid-level. And I found this especially true when I talked about the writers. George Lepard didn't get enough credit. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, was kind of saved because he was also a resident of Baltimore.
Sure.
But Agnes Repplier, I dedicated my book to her. Certainly, she is only known by, I think, a select few right now. But she was once called a shy Catholic version of Ralph Waldo Emerson and the American Jane Austen. And she was known throughout the world, but yet in this city, she was referred to as the quiet lady writer who lives west of the Schuylkill. So you can just imagine. But this is a common theme, and I'm finding this also to be true with a new book that I'm working on entitled Literary Philadelphia. And I cannot believe it, but it's a common theme. Even when James Michener and you know, these things do pop up.
Yeah. You know, one thing that I mean, and you page through the book, and I'm going to go to page 56 here because you have a picture of the photo of the Rocky statue at the base of the Philadelphia Art Museum.
Yeah.
I did not know that Sylvester Stallone's middle name was Gardenzio. I mean, how do you find something like that?
Well, that's actually easy, Paul. You can just do an intense Google search. And but when we took that photo, there was a Rocky Balboa lookalike who actually makes a fair living standing in front of that statue. Same hat, same sort of physical persona. He is so used to playing Rocky, he is Rocky in his own head. It's kind of scary. But we had a good photo session with him. I did not use his photo, just the statue. But I couldn't believe how many people were posing with that statue.
Yeah, and one of the...
It continues to boggle my mind.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of people would argue that if it wasn't for the Rocky movie in the 1970s, that there would not be as much, pardon the pun, foot traffic up and down the Art Museum steps, because it has become, and some people would argue, more, the Art Museum, those steps have become more of a tourist destination in Philadelphia than the Liberty Bell. So, you know, it's one of those things where, and I'm sure the folks at the Art Museum may not necessarily want to admit to the fact that Rocky and the movies have shed all this attention on the Art Museum, so much so that people are now coming into the Art Museum. Hopefully they would be going to the Art Museum to see what's on the inside of the Art Museum, not the Rocky statue.
Hopefully, but if they hang out enough on the outside, you're compelled to see what's inside the building.
Sure.
And but that's another wonderful, surprising thing about the city is that the Philadelphia grit, or the rusticness of the city, is also an important quality. I just did a newspaper column for The Spirit, and I talked about the bars in my neighborhood. And we have a run of kind of hybrid quasi-hipster bars, which are not really gritty neighborhood bars, and they're not completely Northern Liberty style places either. But there are these old Renman bars where you can still go in and spend 25 cents for potato chips on the rack in front of the mirror.
Right.
But I mean, you know, this is a dying bar thing.
Sure. And that may even get us a little bit into your other book, one of your other books, Philadelphia Architecture, because you say you live in the part of the city, Fishtown, Kensington?
I live as the Fishtown goes into Port Richmond by Lehigh Avenue.
Okay. So, I mean, that years ago, the River Wards, as what they would consider, and may still be considered, this was a dying area of the city, but now we've seen this new life that's been, you know, born back into that part of, you know, of Philadelphia. And it's hard to imagine that you could go into one of those bars and get a bag of chips for 25 cents. You can't get anything for 25 cents today.
No. Now you go into a bar, you've got to order from the menu and spend 20 bucks because you have a little hankering of an appetite.
Yeah.
You know, just give me a 50-cent bag of potato chips. But that's all gone. And I moved there about 12 years ago, and there was nothing in my neighborhood except Stock's Bakery and row houses.
Right.
And now, of course, it's completely changed.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're talking with Thom Nichols, who is the author of Legendary Locals of Center City, Philadelphia. This is from Arcadia Press. And this is a series of books that Arcadia has put out. And so if you wanted to find maybe Legendary Locals of Chicago, there might be a book in the series. But, you know, how many people are included in this book, Thom?
I think maybe 150. I don't have the exact count.
Okay.
I think I had intended to put more in. in some cases, it was hard to get photographs of some people. And as I told you before the show, Paul, there were two people who didn't want to be in the book. One because he felt he wasn't worthy to be listed alongside of Eugene Ormandy, and the other, who was a fellow writer, who told me that she wanted to retire and just go into that good night and not deal with the public anymore, yet she still publishes. So I don't know where they were coming from, but it was interesting.
So, I mean, was the challenge then in the book, Thom, because look, you said if there are 100, 150 people listed in the book, there are probably 10 times that amount of people from the day the city was founded in the 1684 till today. I mean, there's thousands of people that could qualify for this. So is the challenge whittling out who gets into the book? I guess it's also the challenge finding people to put into the book who would agree to be put into the book.
Well, most people were very flattered, except for the two that I mentioned.
Sure, yeah.
In some cases, it was hard to get photographs because people kept sending me JPEGs that weren't up to snuff. I couldn't, they weren't of book quality. And so that was a problem. So the photographs actually were much harder than any sort of interview I had to track down. Benjamin Franklin is not in the book.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
And I intentionally did that because, and as I say in my talks around town about this book, is that too much has been written about Benjamin Franklin, but he will be in my literary Philadelphia book. But Ben Franklin is not the benign, saintly Santa Claus that we think he was. and I'm just a little tired of this rendition of Ben Franklin as this jolly old guy who had the interests of the nation right here.
Yeah.
There were many parts to Ben Franklin that were very dark.
Yeah. And he was not born in Philadelphia. He originally comes from Boston, right?
Boston, right. And apparently he had an older brother who was very, very cruel to him, liked to beat him when he wasn't doing his work properly. And I think that was the catalyst why he came to Philadelphia. It's also interesting to note that when he arrived here, it was raining. He was soaking wet, so you can imagine the scrawny, soaking wet youth walking through the streets of what would later become Old City. His future wife saw him then and remembered him because he was so odd looking. And years later, when they met, they recalled that moment.
I guess you know, he left a lasting impression.
He left a lasting impression.
Yeah.
Scrawny and odd looking.
Yeah. Ed Bacon.
Ed Bacon.
And you know, a lot of people may know Ed Bacon as the city planner. Some people may know the Bacon name. They may know that he is Kevin Bacon's father, was Kevin Bacon's father, because Ed Bacon has passed away.
Yeah.
But Kevin Bacon is not
Kevin is very cool. No, because big Hollywood star types, they were so difficult to get photographs. I mean, they have such an artillery around their person, and I didn't want to go the ultra Hollywood route. They were just too big, and I think information about them is everywhere besides. Sure. With Ed Bacon, it was a little different. I actually had some experience with Ed when I did my book, Philadelphia Architecture. Sure. He contributed the photo of Society Hill Towers, but getting that photo was a trick and a half, and then another trick and a half, because Ed, you weren't really baptized by Ed until he yelled at you. And so he once yelled at me on the phone during this getting the photo process, and you know, people told me, "Don't worry about it. You've finally been." You've arrived. Yeah, you've arrived because Ed yelled at you. So.
That's well, you know, but much of where Philadelphia is today in 2015 stems right from, you know, Ed Bacon's thought process. I mean, when we talk about city planners, I mean, he was a contemporary that had a vision for Philadelphia, when other people would, look at him and say, "You got to be kidding! There's no way that you're going to build this or do that." But Ed Bacon always had this vision that kept moving the city forward.
I was talking about Ed Bacon with a Russian Orthodox priest yesterday, and he brought Ed Bacon up. And he was remarking how remarkable this man was. And, he had this architectural vision and actually made it happen.
Yeah.
You don't meet people like that very often. No. He just changed the city.
Yeah.
You're right.
One of the other people included in the book, and again, the book is available through Arcadia Press, so you can go onto their website and order the book there. Is it available in bookstores, Thom?
It's available Barnes & Noble's, okay. AIA Bookstore, I think Joseph Fox, of course, and all over the city and the suburbs.
Judy Wicks.
Judy Wicks,
yeah. When we talk about those pioneers or those visionaries, here she arrives in Philadelphia in 1970, and she starts the city's first People's Store, a counterculture outlet that later became the wildly successful Urban Outfitters. Now, people may know of Judy and I think her White Dog Cafe, am I correct?
Right, right.
And they hear Urban Outfitters, but they don't necessarily connect the dots. No. And she's another remarkable person that is still with us today. But here she, we know of Urban Outfitters, but don't necessarily know of Judy's connection.
That's true because, as time marches on, those things in our past, they sort of go out to sea. Mm-hmm. But we don't always arrive where we are through one straight path.
Sure.
The landscape is very dotted. Judy Wicks was very, very sweet. It was very, very easy dealing with her. I got a photograph very, very quickly through a friend of mine, so that wasn't a problem at all. Mm-hmm. Judy was okay.
So if you reached out to someone and they did not provide the photograph or they didn't provide the information that you were looking for, they didn't necessarily make the cut then?
Well, I came very, very close. I did offer the opportunity to Glenn Halston, for instance, the independent filmmaker, and emails went unanswered. And the same thing with actor Frank X, whose work I really admire. Mm-hmm. Now, Frank wanted to be in the book, mm-hmm. and I would see him in cafes and restaurants all over town, and I'd say, "Frank, you've got 1 month." "Oh, I want to be in the book. This is so exciting. Thank you for including me. I will definitely send you a photo." Well, guess what? No photo arrived. And then I would see him again a week before the deadline. "Frank, you've got 5 days, 7 days." Well, Frank never made it in. And when I saw him after the book was published, he said, "Oh no, you mean I missed it?"
But that's so typical, though,
does
right?
the stage do that to the mind?
Either, you gotta wonder.
I know,
sure. Yeah. So with all of this information, then, and maybe Frank will make it into book 2 if there is going to be a book 2. I mean, the tendency is to say you've hit pay dirt with this. You've found I don't want to say a niche because you've written other books too, but there's all of this information out there that you could easily do a second, third, fourth, maybe even 5 books in this vein.
I would, but my heart is set on my new book now, mm-hmm. Literary Philadelphia. And then after that, I really want to write a book about my years as a conscientious objector in Boston mm-hmm. and Harvard and what it was like dealing with the anti-war movement as a 19-year-old kid. Mm. So, but, I've done 4 Arcadia books now, and I think they're great, and they're a nice company to work for.
Sure.
But it's interesting when you do a book. I don't know whether if you've ever done a book, Paul, but
I want to write a book. I really do.
You want to write a book.
I want to. I just don't have the time right now.
Well,
I'm going to tap into your resources after the show is over. But yeah, I mean, I would love to sit down and write a book, but it's a matter of time.
If you do, and when the book is published, there's a lot of attention that kind of clusters around you. And your publisher usually assigns you one PR marketing person to sort of take you by the hand and, we're going to do this bookstore and that bookstore. But after about 6 months, they let go. Mm. And then you're on your own.
Yeah.
It's an interesting experience.
Sure. But
It's
with, so was Philadelphia Architecture your first book for Arcadia or not?
No, my first book for Arcadia was Manayunk because my ancestors, as it were, settled in Manayunk and then
Okay.
they moved to Roxborough. They were greengrocers, and then my great-great-grandfather was the head of the Manayunks Business Association. And there's actually a building on Main Street called the Nichols Building.
How about that?
And it's still there,
Uh-huh.
although they've colored it this horrible pastel color. But I was in that building before they redid Manayunk as a child.
Oh, wow.
And the old folding chairs were up in the old Nichols Hall with the old gas lights.
How about that?
And it was just an incredible tour.
Yeah.
My great aunt was always worried what would happen to that building, and she always wanted that legacy to be preserved and promoted. So I did the book Manayunk from her old scrapbooks,
How about that?
and so that really helped.
Philadelphia is a city, and this region is a city of history, but sometimes, and what you've done, and just looking through the Philadelphia architecture book here and documenting the architecture of the city, and there are a number of different forms of architecture out there. I mean, what entices Hollywood to come here to do movies is that if you're looking for a 20th century row house, you could find it easily. If you're looking for a mansion, you could easily find that in the suburbs. But you know, we as Philadelphians tend to not respect or appreciate our history as well as our legendary locals.
That's true. They kind of go together. I call it sad teamwork. But I really appreciated Philadelphia when I first traveled internationally, and when I went to a place like Oslo. Now, Oslo reminded me of Philadelphia for some reason.
Sure.
It's this real gritty, walkable city, and Vienna did too in a lot of strange ways. Although Vienna, I think, is a lot grander, but certainly I think when people travel, they come back here and they really see the city with new eyes. But you have to get out of the city in order to appreciate it.
I think you're absolutely right. In this book, of all the people that you've included, was there that aha moment or that, gee, I Thom Nichols, didn't realize that, or I didn't know that? I mean, because I think as a journalist, you know, you do all this research, you do all of this extensive work and writing, and then all of a sudden you stumble upon that tidbit or that morsel, and you're like, I never realized that.
I had two cases like that. One was with Emlyn Edding, who used to live on Panama Street. High society man, married to Gloria Edding, who was a great socialite. She threw great parties, apparently. Emlyn did a sculpture for Dilworth Plaza. It was called Phoenix Rising. He had a hard time getting the commission because Frank Rizzo was mayor then. They did not like one another. There was a lot of contention, a lot of stress, a lot of bad feeling. But Emlyn finally did this sculpture. It was in front of City Hall in Dilworth Plaza for years. It's no longer there. With this reconfiguration of the plaza, it's down in Society Hill now.
Wow.
And I would like to see that sculpture be put back in front of City Hall where it was designed. It was designed for City Hall.
How about that?
Yeah.
And the second case?
That would be Agnes Repliere.
Okay.
A lot of the information about her was completely buried. So as a kind of a literary thing, I was excited about that. It got me to read her work. But I also enjoyed going into the life of Vincent Kling. My father was an architect. I grew up in Chester County. My father used to model himself on Vincent Kling. I think he wanted to be as famous as Vincent Kling.
Sure.
But Vincent Kling also does not get a lot of credit in this city, and he worked with Edmund Bacon.
How about that?
But Vincent Kling has kind of fallen.
Yeah. And so, for instance, is there an example of a building that out there we might be walking by and would have the stamp or the, you know, we would say that was designed by Vincent Kling?
Municipal services.
Really? Okay.
building.
So just learned something, yeah.
If I'm wrong, hang me up to dry, but I'm pretty sure that's the building.
Yeah.
But he also had a hand in Penn Center, too.
Really? Okay.
And so, you know, architects come and go, like people talking of Michelangelo. I don't know.
Legendary Locals of Center City, Philadelphia is the name of the book by Thom Nichols. Again, and one of his other books is Philadelphia Architecture. If you are a student of architecture, if you just like, you know, Philadelphia is one of those rare cities you could walk down Market Street and see different examples of 18th, 19th, 20th, and soon 21st century architecture. This is a book that you definitely want to get your hands on. They are available in bookstores. They're also available through Arcadia Press. And Thom, I want to thank you for coming in and talking today about your books. Continued success.
Thank you, Paul, very much.
And I look forward to seeing your next book on literary Philadelphia.
Thank you, Paul, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for tuning in to the Philly Factor. My name is Paul Perrello. Have a great week. And we just do there and sit down.